A few words about Dr. Milstein. She received her BA from Columbia University in 2004 and completed a master's degree in 2007 and a PhD in 2011 at the University of St. Andrews with a specialization in early modern French and Italian history. After conducting an additional year of research in Parisian and Florentine archives, she transformed her doctoral thesis into the book she will discuss today. Dr. Milstein has taught at the University of St. Andrews and Dundee University, but she currently serves as director of the France and the Medici Research Program at the Medici Archive Project in New York City. Dr. Milstein, welcome.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Joanna Milstein, and it's a great privilege to be speaking to you today. Thank you all for coming. I'd like to thank Scott Kelly and the Vincentian scholars here at DePaul and the Office of Mission and Values for inviting me to present the De Andreas Rosati Memorial Archives Lecture. I'd also like to acknowledge my special guests, my husband Bjorn and my parents, Jean-Christophe and Constance. So I thought I might first establish the connection between the Gondi family and St. Vincent de Paul. In other words, why am I here to talk to you today, and what links the Gondi to the patron of this institution? St. Vincent de Paul was born in Puy, France, in 1580 or 1581, and studied theology at the University of Toulouse. In 1612, the founder of the French Congregation of the Oratory, Pierre de Bérulle, requested that Vincent de Paul work as tutor to the children of Philippe de Gondi, general of the King's Galleys, and his wife, Françoise Marguerite de Silly, Countess of Joigny. One of their sons, Jean-François Paul, became the Cardinal de Retz, author of famous memoirs. St. Vincent de Paul became Françoise Marguerite's spiritual advisor, and she encouraged him to give missions to the poor on the vast Gondi estates. Although St. Vincent left briefly for Brest to become a parish priest in 1617, he returned shortly thereafter to continue preaching on the Gondi estates, encouraged by Françoise Marguerite. His work eventually led to his founding of the Congregation of the Mission in 1625, supported by Philippe Emmanuel and Françoise Marguerite. Professor Barbara Diefendorf has demonstrated that the Gondi couple, and especially Françoise Marguerite, provided not merely the funds for the establishment of the Congregation of the Mission, but were actively involved and even helped inspire the congregation's purpose. St. Vincent also worked closely with Françoise Marguerite to found the Confraternity of Charity on the Gondi estates, providing aid to sick and poor families. But let's go back in time, before St. Vincent de Paul was born and met Philippe Emmanuel and Françoise Marguerite de Gondi. The Gondi, who were they? My recent book provides the answer to that question. Here we have a genealogical table of the family. So the Gondi family were from Florence and first appear in city records in the year 1152. After supporting the Ghibellines in the 13th century, they were temporarily exiled, but returned to Florence in 1280 when they began participating in politics. In the 15th century, the Gondi became important merchants and bankers and were involved in the circulation of goods throughout Italy, where they developed close relationships with eminent Italian families, including the Medici. In 1490, the architect Giuliano da San Gallo began work on the Palazzo Gondi under the auspices of Giuliano Gondi. To this day, San Gallo's masterpiece of Renaissance architecture dominates the Piazza San Firenze, and the palazzo remains in the hands of the Gondi family. San Gallo also designed the Gondi chapel in the Basilica of Santa Maria Novella. In the first decade of the 16th century, Giuliano's nephew, a young man named Antonio Gondi, future grandfather of Philippe Emmanuel, left his native Florence to pursue a career as a textile and spice merchant in Lyon, France. While the Gondi were already well established in their native land, Antonio Gondi's status as the 14th child of a widow meant his opportunities would be significantly greater abroad. Antonio, and later his family's story, was one of success, not so dissimilar from an immigrant in America with aspirations of power and fortune in a foreign land. Antonio's move to France to seek his fortune was not unprecedented, and France had a long history of association with Italy, and especially with Florence. Since the times of Cosimo the Elder de' Medici, who died in 1464, the relationship between France and Florence was marked by a special cultural affinity, privileged commercial partnerships, and at times, political alignment. Branches of the Medici Bank were set up in Lyon and Avignon, many years before Antonio's arrival. These were more than simple financial outposts. They functioned as bases for European diplomacy and crossroads for Florentine expatriates. From a political point of view, Italy was very important to France as well. In 1494, France and Spain began competing for territory and influence on the Italian peninsula, which marked the beginning of the so-called Italian Wars. Italy at the time was seen as the cultural and ecclesiastical center of the world, the land of the Renaissance and the home of the papacy. For the opposing dynasties, control over Italy meant supremacy in Europe. For this reason, France made great efforts to foster alliances with individual Italian city-states, and Florence in particular. Dating from the return of the Medici to Florence in 1512 and the election of Lorenzo the Magnificent's son, Leo X, to the papal throne the following year, French Medici diplomatic ties were cemented by means of strategic marital alliances. Pope Leo X and French King Francis I negotiated the marriage between Madeleine de la Tour d'Auvergne and Lorenzo de' Medici, Duke of Urbino. Their daughter, Catherine de' Medici, was wed in 1533 to Henry of Valois, who became King of France in 1547. Image of their marriage. Antonio Gondi assimilated quickly. In his first steps towards establishing a family strategy, he changed his name to Antoine, and he transitioned from commerce to banking. In 1516, Antoine married the French noblewoman Marie-Catherine de Pierrevive. In 1520, Antoine bought the Seigneurie du Perron and became Seigneur du Perron. He was awarded important positions in the local Lyonnais government. Antoine's wife, Marie-Catherine de Pierrevive, was extraordinary in her own right. She supervised the construction of her family's residences, Le Petit and Le Grand Perron. The Petit Perron, the smaller of the two, is a Florentine-style villa and still exists outside Lyon. It is currently being restored. Marie-Catherine de Pierrevive was renowned for being learned. She hosted one of the earliest literary salons in France, frequented by the greatest intellectuals of her day, including Rabelais and Etienne Dolet. It was also thanks to Marie-Catherine that the Gondi entered the French court. Passing through Lyon on her way to Paris, the young wife of the future King Henry II of France, Catherine de' Medici, met and befriended Marie-Catherine de Pierrevive. Shortly thereafter, Catherine invited Marie-Catherine and her family to live at court and gave them important positions in the royal households. I thought it would be useful to provide some background information on the political situation in France at the time. In 1547, King Francis I died. His son, Henry II, became king. Protestantism, and specifically Calvinism, spread during Henry II's reign. The king sought to destroy heresy and restricted the Protestant right to worship. Under Henry II, France continued to fight in the Italian Wars, but the lack of funds and Protestant threat led to the conclusion of the wars with the Peace of Cateau-Cambrésis, celebrated in 1559. While attending festivities at Cateau-Cambrésis, Henry II was mortally injured during a jousting tournament. Henry II's sudden death put his young and inexperienced son, Francis II, who was married to Mary Queen of Scots, on the throne. The sickly Francis died soon after in 1560, and his mother, Henry II's widow, Catherine, became regent during her second son, Charles IX's minority. Catherine de' Medici found herself struggling against powerful rivaling noble factions at court, both Catholic and Protestant. In 1562, a series of conflicts between Protestants and Catholics broke out, plunging the country into civil war. The French crown's balancing act became increasingly complicated, since both the Protestant and Catholic aristocracy, especially the powerful Bourbon and Guise families, began to compete with the monarchy for control of the country. Since Catherine's sons, 3 of whom became kings of France, were young and weak leaders, Catherine herself was de facto ruler of France until her death in 1589. Catherine, as a woman and as an Italian with ignoble roots, was in a vulnerable position, and many French people contested her right to rule. In order to deal with the complex political situation, Catherine gathered a group of advisors, mostly Italians, who helped her govern France. Along with René Birago, or Birago, from Milan, and the Mantuan Louis de Gonzaga, the most important of Catherine's political counselors was Albert de Gondi, son of Antoine and Marie Catherine. Albert became the right-hand man of the Queen Mother, advising her and her sons, King Charles IX, and when he died in 1574, King Henry III, in all things diplomatic, political, and financial. He served as an intermediary between Catherine and Charles IX, to whom he became a father figure. Catherine's promotion of Italians at court did not go unnoticed, however, and Italian influence was often criticized throughout the period as the root cause of social, political, and economic troubles in France. The Gondi family, in particular, struggled with constant and vehement opposition. Many of France's most distinguished writers wrote scathing pamphlets and poems about the Gondis' vulgar self-advancement as well as their questionable morals. The Florentine Niccolò Machiavelli's writings, which were originally esteemed in France, were reinterpreted in the late 16th century and believed to have inspired resident Florentines to do evil deeds. The Gondi, and specifically Albert de Gondi, were and are often single-handedly blamed for setting in motion the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre of 1572. Influential members of the Protestant community also penned tracts attacking Italians, especially the Gondi, in an attempt to create common ground between French Calvinists and French Catholics through the identification of a common enemy, the Italian, based on ethnic rather than religious divides. In the years after the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, such works proliferated. The Gondi became one of the wealthiest and most powerful families in 16th century France, and this meteoric rise is all the more impressive due to their immigrant background and the opposition against them. In response, the Gondi developed a multifaceted strategy to promote themselves and ensure that their wealth and influence would not suffer from political vicissitudes across generations. The Gondi provided key services to the monarchy, maintained strong family bonds, and married into influential families. Additionally, they cultivated important friendships, patronized artists, and established themselves in the French church. The Gondi became political counselors, military strategists, and leading diplomats. As we will see, this carefully conceived approach required the participation of the entire family. During the course of this lecture, I will introduce you to several of the protagonists of the Gondi family narrative: Antoine and Marie Catherine, their children Albert and Pierre, their cousins JeanBaptiste and Jerome, as well as highlighting the role played by the female family members, such as Jeanne de Gondi and Claude Kathleen de Clermont. I hope to show how the Gondis' multifaceted roles in politics, diplomacy, finance, and the church provided the keys to their success during these uncertain times. Here we have a beautiful portrait of Albert de Gondi. Albert de Gondi was one of the most successful members of the Gondi family. In order to survive and thrive, Albert made himself indispensable to the monarchy. Albert had started his career as a military man, distinguishing himself in battles in Italy and in the Low Countries in the 1550s. In 1565, Albert moved into a large mansion near the Louvre Palace and took part in all of the meetings of the King's Privy Council. He also purchased property and land close to the king, especially around Paris. The Gondi frequently entertained the royal family and other notables in their sumptuous residences, where business was conducted, political meetings were held, and marriages were celebrated. In 1568, Albert bought land in Noisy-en-Creux, where he built a luxurious chateau. In 1571, he purchased the lands of Bailly, Marly-le-Châtel, and Villepreux. In 1573, Albert acquired the land and seigneurie of Versailles and Lagrange-Lessart. Henry III, who liked to spend time away from court, often frequented the various Gondi properties near Paris. In Albert's lifetime, he served as governor of Metz, Provence, and Nantes, as well as lieutenant general of Saluzzo. In 1573, he was awarded the highest military title in the kingdom, Marshal of France. Albert was involved in important political negotiations during the French Wars of Religion, including at the Protestant stronghold La Rochelle in 1573, when he, standing in for the king, negotiated directly with Protestant forces. He was involved in challenging missions in southern France and in Piedmont Savoy, where the French had their last remaining territories on the other side of the Alps. Albert was sent to the south of France several times, including in the aftermath of the controversial Royal Edict of Beaulieu of 1576, which granted many concessions to the Huguenots, including the right to worship in public. Albert was sent to the Comtat Venaissin, which included Avignon, controlled by the Pope. In the Comtat, the Huguenots asked for the same religious freedoms granted to the rest of the country by the edict. In addition to the important role Albert played in France, he was also dispatched on crucial diplomatic missions abroad. For instance, in 1570, Albert was sent to Speyer to participate in the by-proxy marriage between Charles IX and Elizabeth of Austria. 2 years later, Albert was sent to the English Queen, Elizabeth I, in the wake of St. Bartholomew's to explain the events. Catherine de' Medici often noted in her letters that she would, quote, give Albert the ability to use her name and authority as much as necessary. While serving the crown, Albert made efforts to help his family, using his powerful positions, especially as governor, to promote his clients, who were often also his relatives. He made sure that his sons, nephews, and cousins received important posts at the French court and in the army. In return for being rewarded with top positions, members of the Gondi family were extraordinarily loyal to Catherine de' Medici and her sons. In addition to their essential political role, the Gondi supported the French monarchy in other key ways. Crucially, the crown's financial struggles led to an increasing dependence on often Italian bankers and financiers, who not only arranged loans for the royal family through their vast networks, but also invented various fiscal expedients. The Gondi became indispensable because they bridged the two worlds of French politics and high finance. The financial utility of the Gondi family members bolstered their relationship with the monarchs. While the monarchy depended on help from the Gondi to come up with the sums necessary to fund the civil and religious wars, the crown showered them with favor and patronage. Apart from the Gondi, members of the Italian Rucellai, Del Bene, and Zametti families occupied important positions in royal households in the mid to late 16th century. During the reign of Charles IX, 90 Italians served in royal households, and under Henry III, the figure rose to 178. Italian bankers began supporting the French crown financially in the late 15th and early 16th centuries. Already in 1494, Charles VIII re-established large fairs in Lyon, seeking to attract Italians who would fund his Italian expeditions. Italian merchants and bankers in Lyon played a large role in financing the Italian campaigns of Francis I and Henry II. Royal debt accumulated quickly and grew exponentially during the Wars of Religion. By 1574, it was estimated that 1,900,000 livres were owed to the Italian states of Florence, Ferrara, Venice, as well as to Savoy and the papal court in Rome. In due course, the Gondi would serve the crown in representations to all of these places, often securing the loans that would help keep the monarchy afloat. Early in his career, in 1565, Albert de Gondi arranged a large loan to the king through Italian banks. More instrumental than Antoine or even Albert when it came to financial matters, however, was Jean-Baptiste Gondi, Albert's first cousin. Jean-Baptiste, who began his career as a merchant, was frequently dispatched on financial missions for the Queen Mother. Unlike Antoine and Albert, who largely abandoned direct involvement in the world of international banking to join the ranks of the nobility, Jean-Baptiste remained in finance until his death. The side of the family who became aristocrats maintained close relations with their banker cousins. Archival documents demonstrate the frequency with which the noble branch met with their banker relations. Jean-Baptiste, and later his nephew and heir Jerome, arranged for key loans to the increasingly desperate French crown. In addition to their political and diplomatic accomplishments, it was their role in the complex world of high finance that made it most difficult to dispense with the Gondi's services. In addition to facilitating complex financial transactions, the Gondi made themselves indispensable to the monarchy in other ways as well. They made sure they were omnipresent at court, surrounding the king and queen mother at all times. Jerome de Gondi was a pervasive presence at the French court. He was first employed by Catherine de' Medici for diplomatic missions to Spain, before being given the official charge of introducteur des ambassadeurs, and additional positions in the Queen Mother's household. Similar to Albert, his older cousin, Jerome's power and influence increased in the 1570s and 1580s. Jerome's two main roles indicate his dexterity in some of the most important arenas of early modern French society, diplomacy and finance. It is clear that he was one of Catherine's instruments and was often used as her eyes and ears, as well as her mouthpiece, a role he played by extension for Charles IX and Henry III. In 1572, a Spanish informant reported that Jerome governed La Reine-Mère. Jerome was born in Valencia and spent his early childhood in Spain, where his father, Francesco, was Florentine ambassador. He then moved to France to live with his uncle Jean-Baptiste. Jerome was naturalized French. He was sent to Spain on various assignments starting in 1569 and would report back to the Queen Mother about information he gathered. That year, he met with Spanish dignitaries, all of whom, Gondi believed, desired their king to marry Catherine's daughter, Margaret of Valois. Jerome was clearly eager to participate in arranging such an alliance. Jerome was frequently sent abroad on official business, but with other secret missions. His role as informant to the Queen Mother was well documented. In June 1571, the Tuscan ambassador in Spain reported that Gondi had been sent by Catherine de' Medici, supposedly to congratulate the Spanish queen on her pregnancy. In reality, he had other business that the ambassador would try to uncover. He also traveled as a special envoy to Queen Elizabeth I to defend the cause of Mary, Queen of Scots, a mission which, as we know, proved unsuccessful. These ambassadorial missions greatly enhanced Jerome's prestige and reputation in Europe's inner diplomatic circles. It meant that when the king or Catherine called upon him for further diplomatic business, Europe's courts knew they were receiving a man who had the king's full confidence. Back in Paris, Jerome played a key role as introducteur des ambassadeurs. This was a position of great influence because ambassadors had to apply to him for a royal audience. If it was not possible to secure a personal hearing, they would use Jerome to send messages to the king. This situated Jerome at the heart of international political decisions and negotiations. Jerome also traveled to Florence frequently, strengthening bonds with the Gondi's Florentine kin. He was well known for his extravagant lifestyle, and he frequently entertained the king at his luxurious residences. He was an important art collector and patron of a number of late Renaissance artists, such as Pietro Francavilla, who designed this statue of Orpheus in the underworld for his garden villa in Paris. Outside the realms of finance, diplomacy, and politics, the Gondi distinguished themselves in another area, the church. If the Gondi family constitutes one of the great success stories of the 16th century, Albert's brother, Pierre de Gondi, Bishop of Paris and Cardinal, is one of its unsung heroes. Pierre laid the foundations for the family ecclesiastical dynasty, which would culminate in the extraordinary power and influence in the 17th century of Jean-François Paul de Gondi, Cardinal of Rennes. Similar to other members of the Gondi family, Pierre owed his success to the patronage of Catherine de' Medici. In turn, Pierre used the authority he acquired to promote family members, clients, and friends. Pierre initiated the ecclesiastical careers of his nephews. Henri de Gondi was Bishop of Paris from 1598 and Cardinal from 1618. Jean-François de Gondi became doyen of Notre-Dame de Paris in 1610 and was ordained first Archbishop of Paris in 1623. Pierre was not the only Gondi of his generation to pursue a career in the church. His younger brother, Jean, was abbot of Saint-Hilaire and then of Triviers and finally of Chaulnes, up until his death in 1573. The holding of important ecclesiastical positions was a key counterpoint to Gondi roles in banking and royal service. When Pierre de Gondi became Bishop of Paris, the family secured the most significant ecclesiastical office in France. Gondi's career must be considered within the larger context of the Church as a tool for the dispensation of royal patronage. Already during the reign of Francis I, almost one-third of the major benefices in France were given to members of Italian families who had provided military and financial assistance to the crown, a trend reinforced by Catherine de' Medici. Distribution of these benefices was a valuable way to bolster diplomatic links with both the papacy and the Italian city-states. Promoting Italians was also a way to break the domination of powerful local families in the clergy. Cardinal Pierre de Gondi, Count of Joigny, Seigneur de Villepreux, Bishop of Paris, was born in Lyon in 1533. In 1548, he was elevated to the position of abbot of Notre-Dame de Chassaigne in the Archdiocese of Lyon. Both Albert and Pierre studied at the College of Lisieux. Pierre also studied law at the University of Toulouse. In 1566, he became Bishop of Langres. In 1568, Charles IX nominated him to become Bishop of Paris, following the death of Guillaume Viol. Pierre was promoted to the bishop's seat in late 1569 and officially began his duties in 1570. Pierre was also commendatory abbot of several other abbeys and monasteries. The various titles he held include Commander of the Order of the Holy Spirit, created by Henry III in 1578, and Grand Aumônier of both Catherine de' Medici and Elizabeth of Austria. He was counselor in the King's Council and treasurer of the Sainte-Chapelle in Paris. Pierre served as special ambassador to the popes Pius V, Gregory XIII, Sixtus V, and Clement VIII. He was made cardinal with the title of Saint Sylvester on the 18th of December, 1587. Pierre's rapid ascension was due in large part to his close relationship with Catherine de' Medici. Her correspondence bears witness to her confidence in Pierre. Catherine was clearly behind Charles IX's recommendation that Pierre take over Viol's position as Bishop of Paris. Writing to the Pope on September 6, 1568, Catherine underscored her support of Pierre's candidacy for the most important church in France. she emphasized he would serve as an example to others because of his singular virtues, good values, and honesty. Pierre's promotion garnered disapproval. Amongst the clergy, one Franciscan friar protested that Pierre had entered his position not through the door, but through the window. By the 25th of June, 1573, the papal nuncio, Antonio Maria Salviati, a distant Gondi relative and not a hostile witness, commented on the facility with which Pierre obtained gifts and honors from the king. Pierre had just been granted the Abbey of Epau and required special permission from the Pope to hold this office and commendam with 2 other abbeys he already held. In a lifetime of royal service, Pierre richly repaid the favor granted him by Catherine. Pierre played a significant role as supporter of the crown and its sometimes controversial policies, whether defending it against the French clergy or in delicate negotiations with the papacy. Pierre was often charged with facilitating fundraising for the monarchs. During his tenure as Bishop of Paris, Pierre favored reform of the Catholic Church according to the decrees of the Council of Trent. He often had to deliberate on theological matters. In 1570, he conferred with the papal nuncio, Fabio Mirto Frangipani, and other theologians regarding the Pope's pronouncements concerning the execution and interpretation of the decrees of the Council of Trent in France, and also how to handle Calvinist baptisms. He took an active part in encouraging practical reform efforts. On August 27, 1573, Pierre requested a special mandate from the Pope, which would require monks to return to live in their monasteries. They had often left due to conflicts during the wars of religion. Pierre played an important role in supporting religious orders, which were newly established in France. He was amongst the chief sponsors of the Capucins, whom he viewed as essential to the process of Catholic renewal. Pierre and his brother Albert also had a minime convent built next to their chateau of Noisy. Pierre's support for the Jesuits was more controversial. The French court was divided in its opinion of the Jesuits. They were closely tied with Spain and were suspected of having political ambitions in France. In addition to supporting the Jesuits, Pierre also backed papal initiatives for ecclesiastical reform in France in early 1580. The Nuncio Dandino reported Pierre's desire to suppress French-language prayers being read during Mass. Pierre favored a closer examination of the conduct of priests and advocated stricter discipline of the clergy in general. While dealing with ideological debates under which lurked larger conflicts between Gallicans and those who supported Tridentine reform, Pierre was given more overtly political and economic responsibilities. In 1574, he was increasingly involved with the alienations of temporal church property in the endless quest to generate income for the crown. The French clergy was opposed to these alienations and other means the crown used to extract money from the church, such as the décime, the first real tax on the clergy. In 1574, the papal bull of alienation authorized significant sales of church property, and Pierre, along with the cardinals of Lorraine and Bourbon, was designated to preside over these sales. Since Pierre was charged with negotiating the clergy's approval for these alienations and with securing Pope Gregory XIII's authorization, he became a convenient scapegoat for the other clergy members. Hostility towards both the increasing financial demands on the clergy and towards Pierre personally increased in the late 1570s. On June 7, 1576, Pierre was sent to Rome to obtain the Pope's authorization to alienate further church property. The Pope usually permitted the sale of church property because the profits were to be used for the wars against Protestants. However, in 1576, Pierre's task was particularly arduous, since the Pope was disappointed by the recent Edict of Beaulieu's concessions to the Huguenots. The instructions given to Pierre for his assignment in Rome demonstrate the confidence that the king had in Pierre's knowledge of French affairs. Pierre was instructed to argue that the king needed money immediately to avert the complete destruction of the kingdom. He was also to tell the Pope that Albert was attempting to establish peace in the south, where the Pope had vested interest because of Avignon. Although Pierre was not the ambassador of France to the papal court, he seemed to have more authority than the actual ambassador, Louis Chastanier, who was instructed to follow Pierre's advice. Pierre wrote separate letters to the king and queen mother on the 25th of July, 1576, describing his dealings in Rome. In his letter to Henry III, he described a difficult 2 weeks, but he had been able to secure the Pope's permission to alienate property. He wrote a longer letter on the same day to the Queen Mother, emphasizing that the amount was not as much as she and the king wanted, but it was all he could manage. The mission proved important for Pierre because it showed him to be an effective negotiator for the crown. His visit to Rome also helped establish a good relationship with Pope Gregory XIII. At the same time, Pierre's visit provoked anxiety in France. Pierre de l'Étoile recorded that in late October 1576, papers belonging to Jean David, a fiercely anti-Protestant lawyer, had been found, published, and started circulating in Paris. On his way back from Rome in 1576, David died in Lyon, and his personal papers were seized by Huguenots who published them. Among these files was a report on David's trip to Rome, quote, after the departure of the Bishop of Paris, where he had supposedly attended a secret meeting with the Pope and his closest confidants, including Pierre. The 7-page report details a plan to replace Henry III on the throne with the Guise family, based on the idea that the Guise, rather than the Valois, were the rightful descendants of the previous dynasty. The Valois were depicted as inept. According to the text, the plan was to send the Seigneur de Guise around France with a large army, enabling him to seize the throne with the consent of the people and the blessing of the Pope. Catherine de' Medici and Henry III were to be put in a monastery. Pierre was implicated in the plot, and his name was in the title of the text. There is no evidence that David was even associated with the Gondi family. The author wished to draw attention to the fact that this was an Italian plot conceived in Rome. The David documents were almost certainly forged. It is improbable that a minor figure like David would have participated in such an important meeting, and even less likely for him to have been carrying such an incendiary and treasonous report. The nature of the language in the text is also extremely provocative and bears similarity to works written by contemporary Protestant writers. For example, François Hartmann's Franco-Gallia also refers to the principle of elective monarchy and uses the example of the deposition of the tyrannical king Childeric. Pierre was associated with the nefarious plan because he had been in Rome and could easily be blamed, since he was already mistrusted on all sides. At the instigation of the Queen Mother, Pierre undertook many foreign missions, including to Tuscany and Savoy. Along with his brother, Albert, Pierre was assigned to visit Duke Emmanuel Philibert in Turin in early 1577 to convince him to rally another rebellious French nobleman, Henri de Montmorency d'Anville, to the royalist cause. He was also supposed to discuss the proposed marriage between Christine of Lorraine and the Duke of Savoy's son, Charles Emmanuel. Originally, this mission had been delegated to Albert alone, but in late January 1577, Albert had fallen off his horse and allegedly suffered an attack of gout outside Nice, which had injured the entire right side of his body. Pierre was assigned to take his place. The king referred to his confidence in Pierre's prudence and dexterity, as well as his devotion to the service of the monarchy. The nuncio's remarks on this occasion provide a testament to the relationship between the two brothers. Pierre was to help his beloved sibling, who was likely without any other allies in troubled Provence where he was governor. This episode highlights how closely the two brothers worked together in diplomatic matters. In case of need, Pierre was able to substitute for Albert in a wide range of complex negotiations. Pierre de Gondi played an important role in the family narrative. His position in the French church placed him in a unique position of power. The difficulty of his mandate as Bishop of Paris and the complexity of balancing different factions provides evidence of his diplomatic and leadership skills. In his religious capacity, Pierre needed to accommodate different visions of religious policy and mediate the tensions between those who envisioned an independent Gallican French church and those who were proponents of a French church more explicitly aligned with Tridentine reforms. Pierre's support of the Jesuits against Dominican opposition from the Sorbonne serves to highlight this conflict. Pierre also acted as an important mediator between the French clergy and the crown, and the papacy and the crown. In each of these instances, he placed royal priorities first. Like his brother Albert and his cousins Jerome and JeanBaptiste, Pierre was often employed by the monarchy for missions both within France and on the Italian peninsula. Crucially, Pierre was involved with Catherine de' Medici's attempts to preserve links between France and the Italian states, both to retain influence there, as in Savoy, and to secure financial assistance in places like Florence. Pierre's correspondence, which still exists in the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, and which I studied carefully when conducting research for my book, provides a glimpse into his worldview. And on the previous slide, I have an example of a letter that he sent from Rome to the king in 1588. Pierre believed in the supreme authority of the monarchy and the importance of the nobility's service to the king. He wrote that the general population should be ready to sacrifice everything for their ruler. The clergy as well had a role to play, as they had the resources to help the king prosecute the just war necessary for the preservation of the Catholic religion. Pierre's sentiments reflect his own and his family's belief in strict hierarchy. He opposed ideas and actions which threatened the monarchy or authority in general. Pierre believed, furthermore, that France's chief problem lay with politics, not religion. His wealth and influence, combined with these beliefs and efforts on behalf of the monarchy, placed him in opposition to many leading members in French society at the time. He became a perfect target for expressions of anti-Italian sentiment. Defamatory literature directed at Pierre proliferated in the late 1500s. Anonymous sonnets described Pierre as petty and immoral, a hypocrite who was trying to sell the church, a reference to his family's background in commerce. Pierre's promotion to cardinal was deferred several times, although he enjoyed the favor of several successive popes. Unfortunately, Pierre was also subject to the fluctuations of favor of the mercurial king Henry III, successor to Charles IX. Despite Pierre's endless efforts on Henry's behalf, the king did not seem genuinely grateful. In an effort to counterbalance these negative forces, Pierre relied on other sources to preserve his status and position and enhance his reputation. For example, he fostered relationships with the papal nuncios. He also patronized religious orders and gave money to build and repair churches. Many intellectuals, including poets, actively sought Pierre's patronage and support. Pierre used his position to promote several of his family members, and he explored activities outside the church as well. After the death of his mother, he supervised the construction of Catherine de' Medici's Tuileries Palace. He was also placed in charge of the administration of several royal households. Pierre played an important role in his own family's legal dealings as witness and executor in most of their transactions. Throughout his life, Pierre remained firmly royalist. In the late 16th century, in accordance with the wishes of the Queen Mother, after her son Henry III was left without an heir after the death of his youngest brother, François, Pierre supported the succession of the Protestant Henry of Navarre to the French throne in opposition to the Radical Catholic League. Pierre supervised Henry of Navarre's conversion from Protestantism back to Catholicism and gained the Pope's acceptance for this conversion, allowing for Henry to become King of France. Accordingly, Pierre assumed an important role under Henry IV and was asked to participate in his second marriage to Maria de' Medici, after the annulment of his previous marriage to Margaret of Valois, and Pierre baptized their son, the future King Louis XIII. The last but not least important element in the success of the Gondi family was the role of the Gondi female family members. The Gondi women participated in family activities through the church, sought and brokered royal patronage, made strategic marriages, and fostered connections with other nobles. They were also involved in Gondi business affairs and in literary and cultural patronage. In the last part of my lecture, I would therefore turn my attention to the Gondi women. Complementing the role of their male relatives in the French church, the female Gondi held vital positions at the Dominican Royal Priory of Saint Louis in Poissy, one of the most distinguished in France. Albert and Pierre's sister, Jeanne, eventually became the prioress, but not without significant opposition. After the death of Marguerite du Puy de Vaton in November 1583, there were two candidates for prioress, Marthe de Boufflers and Jeanne de Gondi. Although de Boufflers was 84 and Gondi was 44, this did not prevent the majority of nuns from electing the older woman. However, King Henry III sent the Bishop of Nantes, Philippe du Bec, to intervene on behalf of Jeanne and make her prioress. This met with staunch opposition from many of the nuns and caused a significant scandal. Both sides appealed to higher church authorities. Jeanne de Gondi wrote to the Master General of the Dominican Order, and those who opposed her wrote to the Pope. Both authorities confirmed Jeanne's installation. A contemporary memoir pour les religieuses denounced the intervention as an abuse of royal power. Later, after Jeanne's election in 1584, a royal ordonnance pertaining to the serious scandal was issued. This resulted in the transfer of the recalcitrant nuns to other monasteries. Others were warned to obey the pious Sister Jeanne and to act in a suitably dignified fashion. In 1602, Louise de Gondi, Jeanne's niece, became her aunt's coadjutrice, an action which again necessitated royal intervention, this time from the new king Henry IV. In 1623, after the death of her Aunt Jeanne, Louise succeeded as sole prioress of Poissy, once again to the consternation of the community. She needed the Dominican Master General and Pope to intervene to allow her to be confirmed in 1625. The multi-generational power struggles at the Priory are notable for what they reveal about the larger Gondi family strategy in difficult situations. The way the women gained and preserved power in the Priory paralleled their male counterparts' actions at court and in the church. Could the resistance of their peers have been motivated by anti-Italian sentiment? The convent of Saint Louis itself was criticized for not being sufficiently isolated from the outside world. However, it provided a flourishing scholarly atmosphere for the women residing there, many of whom published impressive literary works. Jeanne encouraged the literary projects of the nuns, many of whom wrote extensive dedications to her, including Françoise Oudot and Louise de Marillac in 1621. May I point out that Saint Louise de Marillac dedicated the preface to her translation into French of the 1621 Office de la Vierge Marie to Jeanne, très noble et très vertueuse dame, Madame de Gondi, followed by Somme Penitentiaux et Canoniaux. The choice of Poissy as a family base was clearly not coincidental. Located just outside Paris near Saint-Germain-en-Laye, it was a significant site for educated noble women. Jeanne clearly took some of the most important young women under her wing. Saint Louis enjoyed the patronage of several kings. It had impressive buildings and immense revenues. Several other female family members played exemplary roles in the French church in the 17th century. We have already mentioned Françoise Marguerite de Silly's support of Saint Vincent de Paul. Claude Marguerite de Gondi, Marquise de Magnolet, daughter of Albert, became a great patroness of the church when her husband was assassinated in 1591. She supported the Capucins and in 1604 arranged to transform a former Gondi home into a Capuchin convent. Although her family, especially her brother Henri and Uncle Pierre, prevented her from becoming a Capuchin nun herself, she devoted the rest of her life to charity and supporting religious orders. Claude Marguerite also assisted women who had become war widows, secretly donating money, which enabled them to keep their homes, educate their children, and marry their daughters with dowries. And she was the principal donor to a shelter for fallen women in Paris. Antoinette de Longueville-Orléans, a princess who had married Albert de Gondi's eldest son Charles in 1588, devoted the remainder of her life to the church after her husband died in 1596. She temporarily escaped to join the Feuillantine convent in 1599, after the Pope had forced her to become coadjutrice abbess with her aunt at the Abbey of Fontevraud. She left Fontevraud in 1611 and founded a new order dedicated to Notre-Dame du Calvaire in 1617 in Poitiers. She lived there in extreme poverty until her death. In addition to the female Gondi's role in the church, marriage into important French families was a key part of Gondi family strategy. Through marriage, the Gondi were able to build a territorial empire and accumulate an illustrious clientele. I previously mentioned Antoine de Gondi's marriage to Marie-Catherine de Pierrevive as being one of the keys to the Gondis' initial success. Albert's marriage to the wealthy French noblewoman, the widow Claude Kathleen de Clermont, was another family triumph. Due to his Italian and mercantile roots, many opposed the union, including Claude Kathleen's mother and her cousin, the famous court satirist known as Brantôme. After their marriage in 1565, Albert inherited Claude Kathleen's deceased husband's title and lands in Brittany, and Gondi became Baron of Ray. He later became Duke and Peer. All of Antoine's children who married sought strategic partnerships. In the early modern period, siblings played an important role in enhancing each other's status and reputation. For Antoine's daughters, he would settle for nothing less than the eldest son of a distinguished family. In the case of his sons, he was most concerned that they marry into a family of impeccable lineage. Through marriage, the Gondi allied with aristocratic families with impressive landholdings in key places across France. The Gondi women played a critical role in one other important area. They understood the importance of having large families with many children. The fact that Antoine and Marie-Catherine had 10 children, followed by Albert and Claude Catherine, who had 9, allowed for different children to occupy diverse positions, thus extending the Gondi web of influence. Although many of the Gondi women would merit their own lecture, I will conclude my discussion with two of the most prominent, Marie-Catherine de Pierrevive and her daughter-in-law, Claude Catherine de Clermont. The Gondi matriarch, Marie-Catherine de Pierrevive, I previously mentioned, ran a literary salon in her native Lyon. When she and her husband moved to Paris, Marie-Catherine became actively involved in business ventures with Catherine de Medici and was put in charge of overseeing the construction of Catherine's Tuileries Palace, together with the famous French architect Philibert Lelong. She advised on the design as well as arranging payments for builders and other workers. She was also frequently sent by Catherine de Medici to purchase property on the Queen Mother's behalf. Although the Queen Mother appreciated Marie-Catherine's talents, this did not allow her to escape the scorn of her contemporaries. The writer Tallemant des Réaux alleged that Marie-Catherine had given Catherine de Medici a recipe enabling her to have children because she was unable to conceive during the first 10 years of her marriage. According to des Réaux, this recipe had made Catherine's sons sick and weakly. Others claimed Marie-Catherine was a procuress for Henry II. Negative press notwithstanding, Marie-Catherine was a well-respected figure at court. Following in her mother-in-law's footsteps, Claude Catherine de Clermont was similarly close to Catherine de Medici. Claude Catherine was also well known for being learned. Like her mother-in-law, Claude Catherine de Clermont hosted an early literary salon in her home in Paris, inviting important intellectuals to engage in scholarly discourse. She was a talented orator as well, and participated in King Henry III's Palace Academy, where lectures and debates on philosophy and religion took place. When Polish ambassadors visited the French court in 1573, Claude Kathleen served as their translator and delivered a speech in Latin. There is evidence that she was also a writer and a musician. She patronized the most important French poets of her day, many of whom dedicated works to her. She owned important works of art, and she commissioned the sculptor Jerome to sculpt the statues of her tomb. Unfortunately, her status as a revered intellectual, her prominent political role, and her marriage to Albert de Gondi made her a target of misogyny and anti-Italianism. Claude Kathleen was accused of loose morals and even plotting against King Henry III, which she vehemently denied in private correspondence. In order to counteract these negative voices, Claude Kathleen, like her husband, increased her cultural patronage. The praise of many poets, including Pontus de Théard, Amédée Chamin, and Rémy Belleau, counterbalanced the hateful accusations of the Gondi's detractors. The female poet, Marie de Romieux, cited Claude Kathleen's knowledge of languages and said that her speeches pleased kings and their courts. Gondi women, like their male relatives, had many negative forces working against them. They were forced to deal with anti-Italian sentiment, jealousy, and resentment because of their powerful positions. Some of these women, such as Marie-Catherine de Pierrevive and Claude-Catherine de Clermont, had to cope with court misogyny as well. They acted in similar ways to their male counterparts in order to combat this criticism. Their erudition and their contributions to the artistic and literary world in France made a profound impact, as recorded in many contemporary accounts. Additionally, their extensive interpersonal relationships at court, and to a lesser extent in the provinces and in Italy, were effective in currying favor and gaining royal support, especially that of Catherine de' Medici. As a result, the naysayers had little effect on the Gondi family's accumulation of power, prestige, and wealth. To conclude, as we have seen, after the Gondi family moved to France in the 16th century, they had a series of obstacles to surmount. The period was rife with anti-Italian prejudice and fears about social mobility. The monarchy's promotion of these Florentine immigrants was met with staunch opposition on all sides. Nonetheless, employing an all-encompassing family strategy and working in concert with one another, the Gondi were able to rise through the ranks to become one of the most important families in France, preserving their influence well into the 17th century. Thank you.
A couple questions.
Sure.
Does anybody have a question?
If I could just ask, how did the Gandhi rise to power compare with the rise of other French-Italian families? Do you know much about that?
Yeah, I mean, they were really extraordinary because even among French families, the rise to power usually took up to 3 generations. That was the usual standard. But the Gondi managed it really in 1 generation, which was very extraordinary. But there were a couple of other families at court. The Gonzague-Nevers, Louis de Gonzague, his family was also from Mantua originally, and they were able to rise quite substantially. But they were also considered of royal extraction through his mother's side, and also because he was Duke of Mantua. So the fact that the Gondi, who were really parvenus, were able to rise in 1 generation was really extraordinary. Yeah.
Did you ever write anything about how they contained Spanish power, or the dealings with the Spanish power, the Gandhi family, and diplomacy?
Yeah, absolutely. The Gondi were accused of being closely allied with Spain during a lot of their, and that was sort of something that that their detractors used against them to accuse them of being sort of Spanish informants. But I haven't found evidence of that being true. It's just, another thing that their detractors used against them.
Kind of a similar thing, the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. Could you describe a little bit more what that was?
Okay.
And then you said that, like with other things, they tried to pin the blame on the Gandhi family. Was there any truth there at all, or was this just throwing something against the wall?
That's a great question. So the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre of 1572, the Protestant Admiral Gaspard de Coligny was potentially inciting a war with Spain, and he was encouraging Charles IX, who had become sort of his protege, to engage in this war. And the Queen Mother and a lot of her counselors did not think this was a good idea, so they decided to assassinate Admiral de Coligny. And that the first attempt actually didn't go well, and they had to assassinate him a second time. And the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre sort of was an event which spiraled out of control. Supposedly there was a meeting of the King's Council, and Catherine de' Medici was there. Albert de Gondi might have been there, and there were some other counselors, and they decided that the leading members of the Protestant nobility, who were possibly encouraging this war with Spain, had to be taken out, and so they were assassinated on the orders of royal troops. And after that, there was kind of a miscommunication, and just started this spiral of killings in Paris and in the provinces, and the royal troops weren't sure, so they started going after Protestants in general, and several thousand were killed in Paris and also in the surrounding provinces. So that's I guess the answer to the first part of your question. But the Gondi family, were they involved or not? I mean, it was very easy to pin the blame on them because they were Italians, and it's always easy to pin the blame on an advisor as opposed to on the monarchy itself. So there were a lot of tracts and a lot of Protestant tracts that came out that said that, Albert de Gondi, inspired by the writings of Machiavelli, had been the one who was, behind the idea of massacring all these Protestants. But in fact, it was a situation of miscommunication where things sort of got out of control. And it's very difficult to ascertain the degree to which Albert might have been involved or might not have been involved. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Milstein. Thank you for coming. If I could ask you to fill out this evaluation.